Got to take a break. We'll be right back. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Greg in Canada. Aloha, Greg. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm a second-time caller.
Okay.
And I'm calling in to find out something about Israel because I've been I had a conversation with a friend in the U.S. and I was also wondering myself how do I answer her in certain things, because what I found is just the answers about Israel and what they are and how they what they're doing now. That's all that I can find. But what is it that made Israel the way they are now? How did it start? How did they become so powerful, seeing how they're such a little country? And the other thing, when I pointed out to her about when Israel broke the ceasefire with the Palestinians, I think it was in 2008. Why did they break the ceasefire? What caused it? I just don't have that kind of information to just fire back at her.
Well, let's talk about the second one first. The reason Israel broke the ceasefire in 2008, they broke it on November 4th under the cover of the American election, and they basically went in, they bombed Gaza, they killed 6 Hamas officials, and the next day Hamas comes out and says, basically, I guess the ceasefire is over. And then Israel screams, Hamas says the ceasefire is over, and they launch Operation Cast Lead. See, Israel likes to play a game of starting a war but trying to make it look like it's the other guy's fault, in order to build world sympathy and basically to continue to get the United States taxpayer to pay for all the weapons and occasionally sacrifice the blood of our children in basically beating up on the people Israel does not like. Now, Israel was sort of the creation of a group of Zionists that emerged out of what are called the AshkeNazi's. And the AshkeNazi's are the descendants of Central Asian Khazars who converted to Judaism in about 800 AD. And they have come over the centuries to believe they are the descendants of the biblical Hebrews, even though if you just look at their pale skin, it's obvious they're not Middle Eastern people. And genetic testing has failed to find any kind of a significant link between the Ashkenazi and the actual surviving Middle Eastern Jews. So basically, after Khazaria fell, the Khazar Jews, the Ashkenazi, migrated into Europe and into Russia, and that's where the European and Russian Jews come from. Well, unfortunately, the harsh reality is that over 2,000 years, this particular group of people seems to have this amazing talent for constantly annoying everybody around them, with the result that there has been something like, 2,000 years of constant expulsions and persecutions directed against these people, and there's no common thread behind all of the persecutions. It's not always the Christians whipping on the Jews. It's not always the Muslims whipping on the Jews. The only constant factor in 2,000 years of all of these pogroms and repressions and expulsions is the manner in which the Jewish communities treat everybody else around them, usually involving a great deal of dishonesty. And I understand, because my first wife was Jewish, and she used to say that the 10 Commandments only apply to other Jews. It doesn't apply to everybody else. And I thought she was kidding, to be very honest, but over time I got to see that was certainly the way that she lived her life. And so coming out of the end of World War II, the Zionists saw a chance to basically have a homeland, and they went back to biblical scripture and said, yes, we're supposed to have Israel again, even though they're not actually descendants of the Hebrews. And so they wield a tremendous amount of political influence. Every country is full of these dual nationals that claim to be citizens of that country, but their first allegiance is to Israel. And they hijack the nation's financial systems, entertainment systems, media systems, always in support of this creation of this new nation of Israel. And they finally succeeded, about 60 years ago. And ever since then, because the nation was born in fear and fraud and deception, they've continued to live through fear and fraud and deception. Israel has never actually drawn its borders on a map because it doesn't want to be held to live within them. Israel has never created a constitution. The government is whatever the government says it is from day to day. And Israel is constantly invading their neighbors. They're constantly carrying out assassinations. They live by deception. The motto of the Mossad is, by way of deception, thou shalt do war. And they're trying to live their lives as if they are an Old Testament kingdom where God is going to come down and smite this and smite that. But this is the 21st century. And nations aren't supposed to, use the Old Testament as a guideline to international relationships, especially in an age of nuclear weapons. And Israel has never had to basically learn restraint because the United States always backs them up in everything that they do. The American media will always excuse Israel for everything that it does. And the reality is, they keep waving Holocaust and Hitler and Nazis at everybody till we're absolutely sick of the whole concept. But they do it to basically excuse what they're doing now. Israel's attitudes, it's okay for us to steal Palestine from the Palestinians because of what Hitler did. Really? How did the Palestinians have anything to do with what happened in Nazi Germany? And even David Ben-Gurion said it was a completely bogus argument, that the Palestinians had nothing at all to do with what happened in Europe in World War II. The Palestinians, we came in to steal their land, and we stole their land, and why would they be happy with that? So even David Ben-Gurion understood it was kind of a raw deal. But, Israel is a master at playing the game of propaganda and blackmail and subversion. And every time somebody says, look, what you're doing is bad, they go, Holocaust, 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 to shut everybody up. And they start screaming that we're all anti-Semites, which is amazing because the Ashkenazi are not Semitic. They're Central Asian. I have more Hebrew blood in me than the Ashkenazi Jews do. But I don't go around, telling the Palestinians you have to give me a free home, on your land. And it's just, it's sheer, it's vanity, it's ego, it's arrogance, it's the willingness to basically, play the game this way in the face of people who have a somewhat different set of values regarding fair play and honesty and equality. And unfortunately, Israel's attitude is, we get everything, and what you want doesn't matter. It's like Gene Simmons said, that's what the Goyim are for, or the Gentiles are for. There's this double standard attitude of the chosen people and everybody else is subordinate, by design, by divine decree. And I think anytime you have any group of people that seems to feel that God intended for them to have a larger share of life's blessings, and anything that they do to gain that larger share of life's blessings is a good thing, you're inherently going to create international problems. You're going to create the circumstances where you're leading to war, which is exactly where we are right now. Israel doesn't want to have to live within its borders. It wants the Israel described in the Old Testament, but there are people living on those land, and they don't know from Old Testament. They don't want to leave. And so Israel feels they have the right to go in and make war, or actually, to be more accurate, have the United States make war on these other countries to get them out of the way so that they can go back to living their biblical fantasy.
It just seems like a double-edged sword with them saying that they're being persecuted and like everybody wants to attack them. The president of Iran, supposedly saying that Israel wants to be wiped off the face of the earth.
Okay, what he actually said was Israel will vanish from the pages of history, which is in fact accurate. No government lasts forever, and Israel is very, very self-destructive. Israel can't control their own people unless they create this illusion that everybody's out to get them. But all the hostility that's in that Middle Eastern region is the result of Israel's own policies. Because if Israel had simply granted to the Palestinians what Israel demanded for itself, a right to exist and a right to have a state, if they'd gone along with the UN's original partition plan, everybody'd be happy, everybody'd be buying and selling business and commerce, and everybody'd be living in peace. But Israel's attitude is, we have a right to exist, but you guys don't, so get off the land the Bible says belong to us. Nobody's going to go along with that.
Yeah, my friend's argument was that it's all about the land that's there, and the only thing that I could come back with is, it just might be so about the land, but I think there's also the oil that's there as well. They have to have a controlling interest in there as well.
Well, that's why they were helping to prop up Saddam's regime, because they were getting a lot of oil from him. The same thing with the deal with Mubarak. Israel went down, they bribed Mubarak, and Mubarak was sending Egypt's gas and oil up to Israel at below market rates. And while the Shah was still in control of Iran, a lot of Iran's oil and gas was going down to Israel at below market rates. In fact, Israel was running a tanker terminal for Iran's oil and gas, and they were just siphoning off whatever they needed. and it was a sweet deal for them. That's why they're so angry at the popular uprising against the Shah, is that cut off a lot of the free oil and gas that they're getting. That's when the U.S. government basically came up with this memorandum saying that the U.S. will always make sure Israel has enough oil and gas, even if it means shortages here in the U.S. We got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back. Thank you for the call.
Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, hour number 2. And we were talking before the break in response to a phone call about some of what Israel does that just seems to irk people. And, you know, a big part of that is this tendency to go out and try and start wars with dirty tricks. We know from British intelligence that Israel actually set up the hijacking that led to the raid on Entebbe, and it was done specifically to demonize the Palestinians at a time when the world was starting to say, wait a minute, maybe the Palestinians do deserve a country of their own. I mean, they had their own country before, and the UN wanted to basically break a piece off of it for Israel, and Israel said, no, we want it all. And I think it's that inherent unfairness in Israel's approach to the Mideast that is why they're meeting so much resistance, not just within the Mideast itself, whose land it is, but just anybody with a strong moral sense of fair play has to say, if Israel is asking for a piece of Palestine for a homeland, that's all well and good, but you got to leave some of it for the Palestinians. And Israel's attitude is, they're all made up. There's no such things as Palestinians. They're imaginary, and they want to kill us. And I think after a while we get tired of the whining. We certainly do. Meanwhile, reiterating that Mossad and CIA death squads seem to be behind the Syrian bloodbath. The Lebanon captured, confiscated American arms on their way into Syria. Israel was caught providing arms for those terrorists last November. It's a classic case of going into a country, giving a lot of people a bunch of guns, let them start shooting, and then saying, oh, we must invade to save all those innocent lives. Well, if you were worried about the innocent lives, don't send the guns in the first place. The reality is that Israel and the United States are state sponsors of terror. With the capture of those American weapons in Lebanon, with the discovery of the Israeli weapons in Syria last November, Israel and the United States are state sponsors of terror. So it's almost inevitable that Israel would pull a stunt to try and shift the focus off of them and back onto the bad guys. As you know, basically the U.S. was admitting Israel is behind the bombings and assassinations inside Iran. So a couple of Israeli diplomatic cars were targeted with bombs. One actually exploded. Witnesses said guy on a motorcycle drove by, slapped on a bomb with a magnet, and it went off. That's, if you remember, that's how Israel's been operating inside Iran. That motorcycle limpet bomb is a Mossad trick. So they blew up one car, they found another bomb on another car, and Israel's saying, see, they're the bad people. You got to go kill them. And I don't think anybody's buying it. I'm not. I don't think Iran had anything to do with these car bombs. And I'll tell you why. Of the three nations, Israel, the United States, and Iran, Iran is the only one not trying to start a war. Israel wants to avoid a war. So they're not going to do anything. They're not going to blow up cars. You know, it's like that stunt going around graveyards and painting swastikas on the stones to get sympathy. Or painting swastikas on cars and dormitory rooms, and they keep catching it. It turns out to be the owner of the car and the woman living in the dorm room. They do it to themselves to get sympathy. That's it. Please feel sorry for me, then give me your money and your weapons. So I'm not buying that one either. The Israeli Prime Minister is out there accusing Iran of being behind the car bombings, and Iran is saying, of course not. Why would we do such a stupid thing? And I love this comment Netanyahu made. Iran is the biggest exporter of terror in the world. Not anymore. Not with the discovery of the Israeli weapons in Syria and American weapons going into Syria. So, no, it's not them. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. Navy, apparently they decided they're going to start ramping up for the war in Iran. They backed off. Now it's back again. Israel's out there saying, you get them for us. You get them, or I'm not going to let you be president anymore. So now the United States Navy is talking about Iranian suicide bomb boats in the Gulf. And Iran doesn't need suicide bomb boats. They have ship-killing, sea-skimming missiles. They don't need suicide bomb boats. What they're basically getting ready to do is a repeat of the bombing of the USS Cole. That, as far as I can tell, was another Israeli stunt to demonize the Arabs, like the attack on the USS Liberty. And they're probably going to go out there and bomb the USS Enterprise and say it's an Iranian suicide bomb boat, and the war will be off.